Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast, and today I'm joined by writers David Manderson and Ricky Monahan Brown. Hello both.
Hello there.
Hello Alistair.
And we're here to talk about Already Too Late, a boyhood memoir by the late and great Carl MacDougall, but we'll talk about so much more, I'm sure. Absolutely. So before we get into the book, what does Carl MacDougall mean to you? I've got a story that I will tell, which some people will have heard, but what does it mean to you? Let's start with you, David.
Well, I would like to say that Carl is one of the most meaningful figures of my life, really, because he got to know me, I got to know him. I think it was rather the other way around. He got to know me about 8 years ago and really took me under his wing, and he really began to sort of tell me stuff and share things with me. And I didn't really know why he was doing this, but he'd read the novel that I brought out, and I think he quite liked it. And he had seen in it some potential that he wanted to see developed further. And I hadn't really done that. I hadn't succeeded with that. And what he began to do was to kind of encourage me out. And that was a long process because I'd lost a lot of confidence and stuff like that. And I also came to realise that he'd done that for lots of people. Right throughout the writing world, Carl made that contribution pretty well all his life, or at least from the time he was about 30. And he set me on the road towards finishing other things, to get involved in other projects, to becoming involved with Scottish Pen, to just basically making a contribution in a positive and as strong a way as I could. So he had a huge influence on me, absolutely huge.
That's a recognisable story, I think. Ricky, yourself?
I actually got to know Carl through Scottish Pen, and I think as Dave describes, and as so many people say, Carl is this figure who brings out so much in and from people. I went into the organisation as it feels like now, just a wee boy, and here's this guy who I subsequently find out, because he had such a light touch. I subsequently find out what a giant he was and who he'd worked with and all this sort of stuff. And he was always just very encouraging to this wee guy who at that point, and still is, nobody in particular. So it was just we were talking before we came in, I'm rambling already, but the front cover of the memoir, right, has this wee guy, and you look at him and you can see that he's a wee guy who's going to have to be able to stick up for himself and all that sort of thing. But he was just also, again, to this, me, a wee guy at this point, coming out of nowhere, just so kind as well. So, just a multifaceted guy.
It's so funny you should say that, because I was looking at the cover before we started talking. I was kind of flicking through notes that I'd made, and I suddenly noticed the shoes. And they could be said to be, at the time, girls' shoes, or at least certainly, they're not the boots that you might think of whatever, and you think, this child who's on the front cover, you can almost tell he's going to have to stick up for himself at periods of his life. So many interesting things in what you've said there, because in the book, I think there's a light touch in this book as well. Some very serious and stories, some very difficult and dark times, but his telling kind of reflects the man himself, I think, and I think it'll be really interesting to get into that. But the story I was going to tell was, I kind of owe Carl myself for what I do now, and Scots Whay Hae, because I was at school in third or fourth year, I think, maybe fourth year, and lucky enough to have an English teacher who was introducing us. We'd never been introduced to any Scottish writing before. She taught Sunset Song and Edwin Morgan poetry and things like that. And one day she said to four of us, and I was lucky to be one, would you like to go and hear someone reading? And it was at Stirling University. We were in Glasgow and Cambuslang. So we jumped in our car, and we went to, and I don't remember any forms being signed or any of that kind of thing. It was just pure get in the back of the car. We went to Stirling, and it was Carl MacDougall reading from Elvis's Dead. And suddenly here was this guy, and I'd never experienced before, who sounded like me and my friends and my family, reading these slightly odd stories. And the impact on it, I mean, I know a lot of people will say this now, and I was lucky enough to be able to tell Carl himself in later years just what it meant. And from then I discovered Kelman and Lockhead and Leonard and all these people. So Carl is a facilitator, I think, for other people, not just to do their own work, but for other people to discover work, is of huge importance.
Absolutely.
And it made me think then about when I studied Scottish literature at Glasgow Uni. In first year, everyone got a copy of The Devil in the Gyro, the short story collection. So all these students were being influenced through his curating
Absolutely.
of work as well. And do you think he's received the acknowledgement that he deserves? Because when people think about Scottish literature, still, there's other names that will come before him, peers of his.
Yeah, but I don't, personally, Alistair, I don't think he's been nearly given the credit for what he did. And in fact, I was, if you like, fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be the person who wrote his obituary. I look back all through his work and I thought, I've forgotten half of this. Or I wasn't as aware of it as I should have been, or I wasn't aware of the role that it played. You talked about the Devil in the Gyro. Yeah. Every school in Scotland has a copy of the Devil in the Gyro for its pupils, and quite rightly so. He resurrected, if you like, the short story. And he really, really did that because he was dealing in a culture that said nobody's going to read short stories, so we're not going to publish them. So he brought out Words magazine, okay? Yeah. And in the first or second or third, I can't remember, edition of Words, Alistair Gray's 6 Letters from a Eastern Empire, Jim Kelman, Archie Hines, you name it, they're all in there. And these were the ones that didn't get the short stories published, and he created the means for them to get published. Because he was a journalist and an editor and a punter of other people's work as much as he was of his own. And that's not been given, he hasn't been given the credit for that, really. The Word in the Stones is another one that's been forgotten. That's a big, important book in 1990. And Painting the Forth Road Bridge, later 90s, his reflections on the new Scottish Parliament and stuff like that. He was right there editing and pushing things forward for, 50, 60 years. And that included other people's careers. Absolutely.
And he was involved in Scottish Pen, as we've mentioned. Ricky, we maybe should talk to people, let people know exactly what Scottish Pen is and what they do.
Yeah, well, Scottish Pen is the Scottish chapter of the worldwide organisation Pen International. It's groups and chapters of readers and writers around the world, and certainly here at Scottish Pen we see ourselves as having two functions in particular, and they lead into other functions of course, but primarily we work against the oppression of freedom of expression, if you will.
Yes.
And we also work to promote Scottish literature.
Yes.
And that leads into other work as well. And Carl really, he became president not long after I became a trustee of the organisation. And we're coming up to 100 years now. And Carl is taking on this role of an organisation which is coming up to its 100th anniversary itself, which was founded by Hugh McDermott and Compton Mackenzie and all these sorts of people. So we have a long history, and particularly these days we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But Carl was in many ways just the perfect president for his time.
Yeah.
Because we are in challenging and argumentative times. So a man who is willing to take on board viewpoints and encourage people to get their thoughts out there was definitely important. But also someone who can stick up for what he believes in as well. And on top of that, being this important and talented figure, although he never pushed that part at all. He was a facilitator, as Dave says, in many ways. Yeah.
And that is, again, it's all in the reading the memo, because I didn't know much about his life, and as it turns out, that was maybe deliberate. He kept, it was only latterly that he started to. In fact, I think the opening of the book, his son is asking him, "Well, are you going to tell me?" And well, I'm not going to tell you yet. And that, which is a wonderful way of doing it. He almost wanted to be pushing others forward rather than pushing himself forward. And the names you've mentioned that, just in passing light, go back to McDermott and Compton Mackenzie and then Kelman and Leonard and Gray and all these, you almost get the feeling he would much rather have championed them than gone to the head of that queue. But he absolutely belonged there with them. Do you think that reticence is part of why he's underappreciated in his own part?
Yes, I think it is, because he was constantly editing as well as telling. And even in his conversation, he would let you know what was there and was relevant and what he wanted you to know at any one time. But I read the book with similar feelings. I thought, I don't know this about Carl. And I've known him for quite a while. I said to him when he showed me a very early version of this, I said, Carl, people need to know this about you. And he took that in, but he didn't reply and say, oh no, I don't think so. I think he had done it deliberately to create a vacuum which people would be interested in, possibly now. There were more memoirs on their way. I mean, this was the first. I don't know what happened to the rest of them. I'm hoping that they're somewhere on a computer or possibly with somebody. There was more to come, and he told me some parts of that, and it was scarily. It was dealing with very difficult stuff.
Right.
But he told me enough for me to know that what he would do with it. But he was editing that too as he told me it. So he was a very, very clever man who operated on several levels at the same time. And I just thought he was wonderful because I came to admire him so much. In his pen role, he was just extraordinary. You know, the wee guy who stands there in the girl's shoes and is going to have to tackle the world head on. Yeah. Carl did that in the most difficult times of some of the debates that have been tearing us apart for the last 5 or 6 years, and he never once failed to fight his corner. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. And so we've talked about his facilitating and his work with Scottish Pen. I was just thinking about other things like Writing Scotland, which was a television programme. You know, imagine getting a television programme made about Scottish writing these days. Yeah. And I mean, he did other telly. He, as you said, he was a journalist. Yeah. Words Magazine, which you've mentioned, he seemed to be a collector of others as much as you know, his own output. You know, he wanted to. So it wasn't just that people said nobody reads short stories, but nobody reads Scottish short stories. That's for sure. You know, I mean, certainly when I was at school, that was just unheard of doing that. So it was finding and digging to find the best of the best, and that wouldn't have been easy to do because there wasn't a lot of places to direct you. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he was reading himself all the time, and he told me the story of how he learned to read, as it were, because he had a big sort of road to Damascus moment when he was about the age of 30, and he decided to become a writer. And he said, I started at A and I worked my way through the whole alphabet, and this was all the Scottish stuff. Now this is at the time when they're beginning to set up Scottish literature departments.
Yes.
Other people like Douglas Gifford are negotiating within places to try and get something off the ground, and Carl was right at that moment, and he was learning to talk about the Scottish experience in a way that I don't think many people achieve. It's like, it's not necessarily flag waving, it's not necessarily against anything, it's just about the knowledge and the richness of our tradition, which he loved. He absolutely loved.
I mean, it's that idea, and I guess this is what Scottish Pen attends to, is that a country or a people are lesser if they don't know their own literature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of, you know, talking about Carl's legacy and the recognition of him, some of that will be under the radar, because I think we all have this experience of when we see or read or hear a piece of art coming out of somewhere that we recognise, and it don't, and you, I don't think you think, oh, I could do that, but there's a seed that's planted somewhere in your head that says art and literature and music and cinema can come out of these places that I recognise. And the fact that Carl was putting that work out there and getting the work of other people who were doing that out there will continue to have an effect on Scottish culture, I think.
It's that slight difference, isn't it? Not saying, oh, I think I can do that, but there's no situation that I can't do it. I'm not being told I can't do it, which is, I think previously was maybe what a lot of people thought, was that that's not for me. And there to say, well, not only could this be for you now, but it's happened in the past, and we've got this huge legacy of literature that it's why I think the collection, the Devil in the Gyro, is so important, because people start to go, okay, it's not just these names that are writing today that are suddenly coming through, whether that's crime or whatever. This is part of a legacy which goes way, way back, and I think he seemed to be almost in the 20th century in particular, a kind of linking eras together in the way that he worked. Is that something that you think you would agree with?
Oh, definitely. I think one of the, as I've been reflecting on Carl's life in the sort of lead up to this discussion, one of the things that really grabbed me was the the literary magazine that he was running out of Fife, which was collecting all these, from where we're standing now, sort of legendary Scottish writers, together with kids coming out of school. And again, giving them this idea that you can't not do it.
Exactly.
And then getting this stuff on the TV as well. Like you see, it's very hard to imagine a lot of this stuff getting on the telly to the same extent now, but he was doing that then as well. Hugely.
He was a charismatic man.
Yes.
He really had this charisma, and he was one of the very few literary people probably who can rub shoulders with television people and do it. And the people he worked with, I think it was Paul Merton was one of his producers. They really liked Carl. They really got on well with him because he was on their wavelength. He was as fast and as sharp as them. And although he talked about literature, he could make it give it the sort of, this is living, this is a live thing, and he could bring all this to life for them. And I think that was why he did so well on television for such a long time. You mentioned as well the 20th century aspect of what he did, Alistair. I think we would need to acknowledge that there was a time when he basically got a little bit seen as part of the past, and seemed to move out of fashion. And round about the beginning of this century, he wasn't published very much at all, and he had to deal with that. And he dealt with it in a very his own particular way, which was to be very stoic about it, and to accept it, and also to keep an eye open for new opportunities and to continue to write. And when he came out with in 2017 that Somebody Always Robs the Poor, that was a real comeback. But I think Already Too Late is one of his greatest books. I mean, it's beyond his existence, his life, his greatest book, one of his greatest books.
It's incredible. I mean, as well as being an astonishing story, it's incredibly well written as well. The actual writing of it is amazing. And before we move on to that, I think you've got to be charismatic to hold the attention of a 15-year-old Glasgow schoolboy, and who's on a day trip to Stirling, probably just to get out of the class. But he did. He absolutely, everyone was up, and he was like that in subsequent times where I saw him a few things at Glasgow Uni while I was there, and he would always hold court brilliant.
Oh yeah, he liked being on the stage. Yeah. He liked dancing. He liked food. He liked all the good things in life. He was a Scottish country dancer at one time, and also a singer. You know how he partly composed the cod liver oil and the orange juice.
Well, I didn't know that, and I know the Hamish Imlach version. In fact, there's a fantastic video on YouTube if no one's ever seen it of Hamish Imlach singing cod liver oil and the orange juice. But I did not know that was a co-write. And Carl, it makes perfect sense.
He was involved in all those scenes, and everything Carl did, including enjoying food or having a good time, he did 100% all the time. So his life force was really something. And I think when he was on stage, he was at home. He was at home, really. Yeah.
I don't know if it was you, Dave, or Alan Reich that mentioned it, but what makes that song almost a folk classic is that it becomes anonymised. Yeah. It's a song it's a song you hear belt out in a pub, or your mother sings it to you, or whatever, and that's the sign of a great song from that genre, I think.
I never heard him claim it. I never heard him say I wrote that. He just allowed other people to say it, and he would have liked that anonymity. There's the side of it, like being a folk song. It doesn't belong to anybody. It
is, and I thought it was in the tradition of the Gilly Peace song and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of is.
Yeah.
And also, he was a writer in residence at many institutions throughout Scotland. So again, that kind of teaching others, informing others was right at the front.
Oh yeah, I think he was in every university one with another, Dundee, Orkney. He was an extraordinarily adaptable man, and everybody who he worked with liked him. And people like Alan Reich have got insights into him are just astonishing. I mean, Alan recognises his importance.
Yes.
I didn't really understand all the ways in which Carl was important until Alan had the chat, or I chatted with Alan. And suddenly I saw all this other aspect of Carl I'd never seen.
Yeah. So let's move on to Already Too Late, which, as we say, it's an extraordinary book. And it's one that it seems he wasn't in a hurry to tell this tale. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think he knew that one way or another, this was the time of his life to tell it.
Right.
He wrote another story at the time when I remember seeing a particular sentence in it. Said, so the protagonist says, now that he's nearing his 8th decade, he thinks this will be his last. And I picked up on that phrase. It was written several years before Carl's death. But I think that in this he knew that he wanted to leave a memoir. He wanted to put the record straight, if you like. He wanted to also give him a version of his life, which is done in such a way, and when I say edited, I don't mean left stuff out, but put in a shape, in a narrative shape, of which this was the first part, and I'm hoping that other parts still come. He was aware of where he was in his life, and I think that resonates through the book totally. Yeah.
I think he had a sense of timing with respect to his artistic work, and you can see that in a sort of small scale in the short stories, because I mean the short story form is amazing, and particularly when you get to that last page, the last couple of pages, and things resolve, and Carl could pull that sort of stuff together, and it's almost like he's applying that sense of timing on a much larger scale with this book. The time is right.
Yeah.
And his use of language always.
Yeah, I mean the material he covers is dealing with some really difficult stuff.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about post-war poverty, conditions where people died quite, in industrial accidents, or his father was killed. I think there was an implication that his father was deaf and couldn't hear the train coming. There was stuff happened which just is horrifying, and yet never do we feel so bound up in that we become overwhelmed by the tragedy of it, because this little boy has to go on, and he just has to carry on with it, and he becomes seriously weighed down by things like depression, but he doesn't, that's not in the book, so it's going on and on about depression. You just see this stuff accumulate and accumulate.
And that's, I think, what makes it so incredible, is it's not an adult looking back at his childhood. It's a child discovering life as, that's what he's telling, like your father disappeared, and then discovering what's actually happened. There's lots of bits like that where he's managed to make you, the reader, but through the child, piece together. You don't get the full story anywhere near the full story at the beginning. You've got to get it as Carl, the young Carl, is getting it as well.
Absolutely, and all these other figures in his life just disappear, and nobody talks about death. Uncle Charlie disappears, Uncle Harry dies. It's like, these are tragedies to the boy, and it expresses itself in his behaviour, because he says, are they dead? And nobody's, we're not allowed to talk, we don't talk about that sort of stuff. And so it's eradicated from his consciousness, so he grows up really not knowing whether these people are alive or there or not. And it creates this sense of great mystery, I think, in the book as well. The boy's got to piece it together for himself, and we're in that position too. I think it's an amazing piece of work. The more I look at it, and I was looking at it again today in preparation for this, I thought, the stuff I just didn't pick up on this the first time round.
Absolutely.
Going through towards the last part of the book, which is I had to look around on the internet to see if there was ever such a place as Manderson Residential School, because he told me a bit about Manderson. He would sometimes tell me snippets of his life as if they were meaningful to me. So he'd often say the word, of course that was when I was in Keppoch Hill Road, and he'd stare at me. And I don't know what Keppoch Hill Road means, but
it meant a lot to him, but it should mean a lot to you. Yeah.
And there it is in the book. And then Manderson, and it's just it's unbelievable that such a place just existed. And I struggled to I sometimes wondered, was that true? But it was true, because there was such a place, and he was in it, and it's every bit as horrifying as in fact, it's more horrifying than he portrays in the book, because more of that, I think, was to come in other parts of the memoir.
And Ricky, when you read it, did things that you knew about Carl start to make more sense, or did the man himself was more revealed to you in that way?
I think so. I mean, we talk about Carl being a great facilitator, but I remember I was first asked for a quote for one of his obituaries. I think the one Dave did actually, coming after his death. I came up with something about my own personal reflections on Carl, about just what a genuinely nice and kind guy he was. But I think we ended up changing the quote just a little bit because that didn't capture. I mean, you can't capture the entirety of the man.
Yeah.
But it missed out some important stuff, including that steeliness that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that steeliness that sort of came out of these experiences came to be, I think, important not just in the writing, but in the way he dealt with people. His memorial service, I thought, was an incredibly, and also the posthumous book launch.
Yes.
They were both incredibly moving because people were just lining up to talk about how Carl had taken the experiences that he describes in this book and hopefully future volumes, and he took those and he moulded them into tools to help other people who were having a hard life as well.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It's a book that you can't help but reflect on your own childhood in particular, but life in general, and little things that to a child would be huge, like a trip to the zoo or a fight, or I think most of us would have put such things to the back of our minds, but to the child at the time, these are huge, occurrences.
Yeah. And we're there with him. He watches a fight in the close, and it explodes over an argument between Stalinist policy and nationalist belief, and somebody gets serious doing as a result of it in front of the child, and blood is spattered, and it's pretty, it's graphic, and this is exactly what it must have been like. These kids playing near canals and being warned by the granny, don't go near the canal, and then one of them at the end of the book, unfortunately something bad happens to them, and this was really observed life. But I'd like to give you an example of Carl's steeliness in relation to myself, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I was working with him as a teacher, and I'd kind of let things go because I was kind of getting a wee bit fed up, and I was going, and he stood by me one night and he looked me right in the eye, and he had eyes like needles when he wanted to be, and he said to me, "I will never let my standards go." And I thought, right, I get it, okay.
Yeah.
And I pulled my socks up, because I thought, I don't want to look like an idiot in front of this man. I really don't. I want to live up.
I don't want to disappoint him.
I don't want to disappoint him. And from that point onwards, I began to learn a lot more about the dedication and about the oomph you need to be a writer of any sort, and he had that in spades, and he passed that on. He passed on that steel. He really did.
Yeah. I mean, that's... And I think that steeliness, absolutely, you can see from the incidents in the book. Ricky, you mentioned the short stories, and it's different tales put together, isn't it? It's a telling of these tales and weaving them together rather than any kind of overarching desire to make a bigger point or anything like that. He leaves the reader to kind of, make their own points about what's happening. Yeah. He's telling the tales.
Yeah, I mean, that's Carl. He has this incredible facility with words.
Yeah.
He's clearly, as Dave has been alluding to, he's put in the work to such an extent that I was looking over his final President's Report to Scottish Pen, and it's just beautifully written. But by the time he was reaching this, later period of his life, I think it must have just been automatic for him to just be writing beautifully.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I can't stand up in front of our AGM next week and relate this screed of garbage after Carl's been, he covered 3 or 4 pages just of talking about what we've been doing in the past year and just brilliantly expressed. Yeah. And again, not being didactic about it, bringing you in. Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, he worked as a journalist for a long time, and he reviewed for the Herald for 15 years.
Yeah.
Every week, a different book, a new review. He worked for some rigorous people.
Yes.
And he lived up to what they expected and a bit more. All those people were very impressed with. They loved Carl. I mean, everybody in the media and the newspapers other novelists of his generation talk about him with nothing but admiration. He deserves every bit of it, you know.
And yet we said at the beginning that he seemed to stand apart, deliberately so, I think. And I think this book kind of shows that as well, that this is someone apart, and maybe for very good reasons at a young age. It never struck me at all that Carl would have German connections at all, and yet that side of the family, the German side of the family, at that time in Britain, it would have been so difficult when that comes across.
The Kaufmann name, and I think Jewish heritage as well. He was aware of that, and that comes across in the book. I remember him speaking of it, but I didn't really get it at the time. But when I read the book, I thought, I understand, of course, the war and German prisoners and some local worthy coming round to keep an eye on them in case somebody's spying within the family and just poking their nose in. This would have happened all the time. And it happens on different levels to Carl in his younger years all the time. It's a vision of Scotland that I've not seen anywhere else, really. And in no other book have I seen anything quite as realistic, is that the word, as to what it must have been like for ordinary people during the war, which he experienced, obviously.
And also the style of it. I've read quite a few memoirs recently, and some fictional, but for instance, I've just finished reading and reviewing Eleanor Tom's new book, Connective Tissue, which is very much based on her own family and family life and everything, but it's a novel. You almost feel with this that it could be a novel, because as you said, David, there's parts of it you go, did that happen? Is that true? You know, and I think maybe the reason that he didn't write, one of the reasons maybe until later in life, is because he quite liked that about himself, that he could tell tall tales as well as just tales.
Oh no, he could move from fiction to non-fiction. He was really a master when you think of all his achievements and all these things. So, The Word on the Stones is something that's absolutely factual, and somebody described it to me the other day as a kaleidoscope of Glasgow. It's like all these different fragments all put together by big teams of people round about the year of culture. But this book is something entirely different. It's like this playing with the form. This is memoir, this is fiction, this is non-fiction, this is then, this is now. He's toying with all these things all the way through. It's a really masterly work, I think.
Ricky, did you know he was writing memoirs?
I did not know that he was writing these. And obviously there are gifters, and Dave's touching on something which I think is very interesting about the memoir form, and you've touched upon it as well here, and talking about Eleanor's work, and how so much of a writer's fiction, where else can it come from? It has to come from some aspect of experience, and I think that's well recognised. I think sometimes what we don't recognise quite as much is the extent to which a successful memoir is a literary piece of work.
Yes, I agree. Totally.
And to write a book like Carl's hopefully first volume of memoirs, and sort of have be able to sort of move through these walls between something that's overtly literary, if you will, but also talking about these very real and effective experiences. It's a real tightrope, I think, and you have to be I think in order to be able to pull off a work like this, you have to be a skilled reflector on your own life, but also a skilled writer. Now, I hesitate to say literary writer because I don't want to freight this too much, but you have to be like a good writer, and the journalistic aspect as well that Dave talks about. To be able to pull all these threads together to create this is it's an important and affecting task.
And I think you're right. I think it's a case where perhaps once again labels aren't necessarily very helpful to say one's novel, one's, because memory itself is going to play tricks and coming up with its own fictions, and to go back to such a young age, it's almost bound to happen, I think.
It is. I remember so many bits where he told me bits of this, and he said, my grandfather always used to say, "You are how?" And I thought, and of course his grandfather spoke Gaelic. So Alan Reich said this at his the post-launch thing. He said Carl was linked to the Western Isles as well, and he was also linked to Glasgow, and he was linked to Fife, and he was linked from all different parts of Scotland, and his interest in accents, I think, stemmed from the fact that he knew all these different accents and moved about a lot. First time I've ever knew he moved about as much as he did was reading this book. But going from Fife to Glasgow with a Fife accent and a German name cannot have been easy, and it is not easy.
No, I mean, going from Fife to Springburn in particular, I mean, really kind of what a change that is.
But
City of Dreadful Night, I was thinking about it.
I think so. But one of the pleasures I had was just listening again to his talents with accent and with speech. And I noted the part with the little boys listening to his parents' voices. I think the voice meant a great deal to Carl, and he listened to things very, very closely, different accents, different intonations, different ways of speaking, and the way he takes the dialogue out of inverted commas and marking it out from the narrative is interesting to me, because it makes you read things very, very closely, and the voice meant a great deal to him, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that move at that time, it's there's so many things in the book that with reflection you go, yeah, that would have shaped anyone, and it really shaped him. And like you said, it means it's a book which you almost immediately empathise with, because you think about the major things that may have happened in your life. Again, often maybe that weren't talked about when they should have been talked about.
Yeah, totally, yeah. So many silences surrounded him. So many ways in which things that should have been talked about weren't talked about.
So many mysteries.
Just the child guidance aspect of it. I think one of the chapters towards the end is called Child Guidance. It couldn't be a more ironic title, but that was the official name. And the way in which the teachers begin to monitor his work and begin to say, now, why haven't you completed this bit? And I noticed you started this, Carl, but you didn't finish that bit. And you begin to get this sense of something building again. And again, reading it today, I saw that very clearly. He's leading up to something. I mean, he was really on something there, and he knew it. Yeah.
And you were saying that this love of writing, this almost obsession over writing, I mean, that's in it as well. Even in the titles of the chapters, this isn't just a throwaway thought. He's really thought about everything that goes into this.
And the language.
Yes. The language is just wonderful. Yes.
And I think that does partly come out of moving around, the Gaelic heritage as well, and all this sort of stuff. And of course, he was a promoter of the Scots language as well, and then sort of moving among these languages, and I think sort of getting to see how the way in which you express yourself changes the story you're telling. Is something sort of comes out of Carl's work. He has a facility that I think comes out of the recognition of the way words and language work.
And the language, again, it's never heavy-handed saying, oh, well, this should be allowed and this wasn't allowed, or any. It's done through how his mother spoke and the things that he remembers and the way she said it, how speaking in certain ways was part of her identity, and when she didn't do that, she wasn't whole, if you like. These things are shown rather than told. Yeah,
well, it's the way they speak to each other, isn't it? The granny and the mother are just fantastic. They're so extraordinary people. And it's done through their dialogue, really. Throughout the book, all these people come alive. Again, I love the meeting of the gypsy people outside Oban. Just the kind of the description of them and the way they lived. He lived to see times when people lived next to the road, getting cans of water from the river and boiling them up, and he noticed all this at the time. And these memories, sometimes he shared them with me, as I said. He came out with these things, but you wouldn't know what he was relating them to. This is the first time I've seen them all put into the jigsaw puzzles being put together. So had
you heard some of these stories?
I heard some of them. I heard some of them. I'd say Kepper Hill Road was meaningful, but as I say, I didn't really know what he meant. But I got it this time. But other things were Oban. Fife was very important to him. King's Kettle in particular. He was. I later learned he was a member of the folk club up there, and he was something to do with. That was how the cod liver oil and the orange juice developed. And he mentioned stray bits from his life all the time. He also went to Paris when he was a young man. He didn't mention that make him into what was going to be a future memoir. Around about the time when, the sort of left bank was lively and people were kicking about were like the memories of Sartre and people like that. Carl was there walking along those bookshops and drinking in what he could. He told me he was very lonely. He never met anybody there. He was never been so alone as he was at that time because he just went there. And then he spent a long time in Birmingham for some reason just to get away. Then he came back.
So this was all before he decided to be a writer?
Yes.
This was him living the life before he decided, I'm going to write it?
He was fascinated by what he was reading, I think, and Paris would obviously have been a place he went. Everybody went to Paris at that time. Birmingham, I think it was just to get away from Glasgow, and because it was a big city, and he possibly knew people down there. In fact, I think he knew Kirsty MacColl's father, Ewan MacColl. He knew Ewan MacColl very well.
Right.
And he told me Ewan MacColl said to him one day, "What are you going to do with your life then, Carl? You've done all this. Is this what you want? Is this enough?" And Carl went, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I mean, come on, you're doing fine. Yeah, you're doing fine, but come on, what's your plan? What are you going to do next? What are you going to be?" And he went, "Oh, right, I better think about that." So he was mentored himself by other people.
And that probably fed into his own mentoring.
It did. Absolutely, yeah.
And were you surprised, Ricky, when you read the book about any aspect of it? I mean, it's got so many aspects to it, about the way it was written or the stories that came out.
I mean, everything because I mean, I came into Carl's life at a much later period. And so Dave had heard snippets of these stories before, but because of the way I found Carl dealt with people, which again is this sort of passing on of the baton, the sort of, he had been mentored and he mentored, which he did automatically with almost anyone who came into his life, which is, but again, with a lightness of touch.
Yeah.
So everything here was fresh to me, and the tragedy of so much of his life, and the stuff that he had to fight through to become this person that Ewan MacColl would say, so what are you going to do? And then actually think, I should do something. It's all fresh. And again, partly because of this idea of how effectively he brings you into the child's mind, which is just an astonishing achievement.
Yeah.
And you're right, all those things there, but the way it's written, because there's a lot of humour here, and we should make that clear. And you almost have to work through a lot of the descriptions to get what's really going on. This is no misery memoir at all. No. It's absolutely not. It's actually a life-affirming read, particularly since we know the man who came from this childhood as well.
Yeah. I mean, he had to face things that most of us don't, but he certainly went about facing them with a determination and a courage that I've not seen in many. He wasn't a very big man, but he was strong.
You know what? I met him a few times, not that often, but you're right. But he appeared to be a big man.
Yes.
The way he had that aura about him.
He did. He wouldn't back away from a confrontation, and he came from a hard, tough time, and he worked through tough professions. The competition in the Daily Express would have been fierce. But he certainly made himself a reputation. In fact, he told me he became Bud Neal's copy taker of choice. Bud Neal asked for him because he made a point of reading it back to Bud Neal and so on.
Is that the cartoonist?
Cartoonist, yeah. So Bud Neal said, that young MacDougall, I want him to be in the phone for me. And he would dictate whatever the cartoon was saying that day. And the thing that Bud Neal liked was Carl's ability to take down the dialect, which Bud Neal wanted in his cartoons. So he really went for making something of himself through journalism first. He met Alistair Gray at that time.
Yeah.
They hung about that bar up by the Express, the Arlington.
Yes.
And they met there. Now, Carl would have known who Alistair Gray was, but many people didn't then.
No,
He wasn't a well-known person, but they got to be friendly. And I was recently looking at A Life in Pictures again, the Alistair Gray's book. That history of Carl and Alistair and Archie Hind and all their daughters and all their sons and all the family all around, that was how it was. That was a scene of friendship and domesticity and people helping each other out. And, it was that, but it was also consciously, on Carl's part, and I'm sure on the others, more. It was an artistic movement, if you like, beginning of something, putting together all these different talents. A Scent of Water, which is a book. I don't have a copy of it. I wish I did, but it was illustrated by Alistair, and it's these are works of art. These books now. He was consciously building something all his life, and he helped other people build it too.
To be a fly on the bar when those folk got together. But he's never mentioned with the Hobsbawm group. Was he ever involved with that kind of writing group?
No, he was never a member of the group. I don't know why. I don't know whether he didn't want to be. I don't know whether he wasn't invited. I really don't know. Because of that, he was very friendly with some of them. He was very friendly with Alistair. He was very friendly with Tom Leonard. He knew Jim Kelman very well as well. I think others who were in that group he knew less well. But he was following a different path. One writer that was really influential and whom he kind of became a friend with was Ian Crichton Smith.
Yes. And
he really engaged with Crichton Smith's stories. And reading Crichton Smith, which I have done to some extent, I can see why, because there's similar interests and maybe even similar issues in there, but in a different culture. But then part of Carl was from the Western Isles, and he had insights there as well. So he was exploring, so many different things, and he was weaving them together in so many different ways. There was the Glasgow thing, very strongly Glasgow, and then there was all these other things as well, and they all show in his work, I think.
And it strikes me as we're talking that this a view that we have of him as a kind of outsider, maybe that was deliberate, and that allowed him to, because when you're part of a group, then some people will judge that you're not part of their, this belonging to one thing might mean that you're not open to belonging to another thing or whatever that might be. Whereas with Carl, who ploughed his own furrow and accepted everyone and was interested in everyone, as far as I could see, from Scotland as a whole, which I guess wasn't happening that much back then either. He was someone that travelled and educated and all these things right across the country. He maybe saw that as necessary for who he was. Do you think that's maybe...
Well, I think...
I mean, then again, we've just listed he was part of Penn and he was part... But he always did seem to, as a writer, kind of stand apart.
As a writer, yes, exactly. Because, many writers would say that's a key part of the role. Being able to stand back and be able to sort of evaluate and transfer that to the page. And I was reading again before I came to talk to y'all about the part that he played in the Glasgow's Glasgow exhibition, and apparently coming out of that there was some problems with some of the other folk who were part of the scene at that time, and presumably that's because Carl, as a person who had something of this outsider view of things. I mean, that's almost something that's necessarily going to come out of that, because he has his interpretation, he has his view, having seen the things that he's seen and put himself in the position to be able to look at things with that gimlet eye. These sorts of things are going to arise.
I think he was an outsider, and I think he kept himself outside certain things. He went so far, and then he was decided he was always going alone as well. And
again, I think that the roots of that are in the memoir. I think absolutely. Being taken out from his family, people either being removed from him or him being removed from people. Any kind of, and that's those stories about him going to Paris and other places on his own. It absolutely makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's the loneliness in childhood, and it carries on.
Yeah.
There's no way forward for Carl except the one he chooses.
Yeah.
And I think it's always been like that for him. That's like that picture of the boy in the front,
Now, this is probably a huge question, but could you kind of just talk a little bit about what his legacy has been? We'll start with you, Rick.
Well, I mean, he comes from that sort of very fertile period. The people that we're talking about, the names that we're talking about, including Carl's own name,
yes,
are hugely important. I mean, I'm very much not from that generation, but because of the work of Carl and people like Carl, and the work that Carl was facilitating and putting out into the world, means that you have people who are creating new Scottish work, fresh Scottish work, because that work existed in the first place. I mean, he has planted seeds that will continue to grow throughout Scottish culture, and that's something I think that we need as writers, as artists, as people, and as citizens. So to have played a key part in getting that stuff out there, and then also the Scots language stuff, that kind of keys in there as well. We will be continuing to read work that exists because of what Carl did, and that is better because of what Carl did, for a long time, because of all the things that Carl did. And I just feel very privileged to have been able to spend a small amount of time with him.
And David, what would you say?
Well, it's such a huge question because he had such an impact on myself personally. I miss him hugely, and we all do. And I think that is the legacy. That's one of the part of the legacy. We're going to miss his presence.
Sometimes I would bump into him on the street. And you're just always pleased to see it. And he seemed always, now I don't know whether he was or not, but he always seemed pleased to see you.
He would be, because he's delighted to see coincidence and people meeting and all that sort of warmth. That's all he's all about.
Exactly.
As far as his legacy goes, beyond my own personal thing, I think his legacy is emerging now. The impact he had on other writers is extraordinary, and you could work through them and name them, but that's not really how you would want to do it. He had profound influence on influential figures, and sometimes I was astonished by who he had influence on. For example, I went once up to Monahan Moor, and there on the wall of Monahan Moor was a small picture, and it showed three people standing in it. One was Carl MacDougall, the other one was Alison Kennedy, and the third was Janice Galloway. Now, I didn't know they knew each other, but they knew each other. And what Carl's impact was always to encourage people to do their best. He kind of didn't take any prisoners in that sense. We all felt that impact. You had to go sort of, I'd better do that then. And he had that impact, and he didn't accept just do enough. No, you've got to do well. You've got to write well, and the evidence is there in that book. I hope his legacy lives on, because we forget so easily. I hope we have this tendency in Scottish literature, every literature probably, to wipe it off. That doesn't matter. We've got new things coming through today. He got a little bit of that in the early part of this century, and has come back with his riposte, which is these books, I think.
And I think it's important to recognise that Carl's legacy isn't just as a writer and within the writing world. The things that Dave's describing right now, he did with people personally. There are people whose lives were changed for the better. Nothing to do with art, nothing to do with literature. Their lives were changed for the better because Carl MacDougall came into their lives and helped them and encouraged them and challenged them. And in many ways, I suspect, well, certainly for those people, but in many ways, that's his most important legacy, I think.
And I think as well, going back to his book being in schools and his being taught at university, and his teaching at university, his influence on, Scottish literature is still a fairly small world, you know, it is. And a lot of the people that are working in it, including myself, were certainly influenced by Carl, no doubt about it.
Oh yeah. 100%. I mean, he knew what he was doing, and he was out there saving people. He really, really was. He was
100%.
looking for those that needed saved, and he found them.
Yeah.
And I was delighted that he did that for me.
And that compassion and kindness is in the book as well.
Yeah.
As I say, this book could have been so different in another writer's hands. I know that sounds daft. It wouldn't have been another writer's book, but it's so Carl MacDougall, and that's the great thing about it.
That's
and I
it.
guess at the end of the day, that's what a great memoir should be. It should be that this tells us about the person and more.
Yeah,
Much
yeah,
more.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate Carl MacDougall. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, maybe if a second volume does come, and let's hope it does, we three can get together and we can talk about that as well. But thanks so much for taking the time to come along and chat about Already Too Late, a Boyhood Memoir, and the great Carl MacDougall.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Alison.